Welcome to Sacred Conversations, a place where Dr. Nicole Dolan and I, Robin Bethel, along with a myriad of guests, explore some of the sacred threads and wholeness of life, held within the light and within the dark, held within the immensity. Thank you for being with us. In this episode, we spoke with Gwyneth Flack, an author and teacher who helps people deepen further into their own intuition and awareness of energy. Gwyneth shared stories of the role intuition and energy have played in her own life, and also brought forward some of the tools she uses to teach others. Nicole and I loved inhabiting this conversational space centered so deeply in the unseen world, with a beautiful soul like Gwyneth, and we hope you enjoy as well. We are here today with Gwyneth Flack and, of course, Robin. Good morning, Robin.
Hi.
Nice to see you. And Gwyneth recently wrote a book called Limitless, Transform Your Life with Intuition and Creativity. So we are so excited to have you with us today, Gwyneth. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for sending us your book. That was a beautiful surprise in the mail. And we just like to start sacred conversations very simply just by asking you to introduce yourself, but really sharing, who you are in the world. So whatever comes through with that question to you.
Great question. And thank you so much for having me on your beautiful podcast. So I'll start with that. And so I would describe myself in many different ways, I suppose. One way is I would consider myself to be a spiritual explorer. I love exploring spiritual growth. And I would say I'm an intuitive explorer. I love exploring the unseen world and our natural innate intuitive abilities that we all have. And I love physically exploring in the world too. So I love traveling and exploring nature. So explorer would be one way to describe myself. I'm also an author, of course, and a writer. I've been writing my whole life. So I love writing, and I would describe myself as a creative person, highly creative, and also a mom and a wife, and also like a co-steward, I would say, of a large piece of maple forest where my husband has his maple syrup business. So that connects to nature and my love of caring for land, as well as the equal love that I have of caring for people. So that's a long description, but
There's so many textures in that. Yeah, I appreciate it. I think I would say how many of us introduce ourselves when we can really feel into the nuance of our beings, right? And one of the questions one of the reasons we like to ask that question is because in our world and our culture, the question is always like, who are you? And it's about what you do, right? So I think
yeah.
it's beautiful the way that you're able to share that. And I found myself just right away kind of tuning into you and being like, oh, I wonder how she got there and what her story is. So I won't ask you to share the entire arc of your life, but something that Robin and I like to ask of our guests too is just to share with us a sacred story from your life. And so whatever comes up with that.
Oh, it's such a great question. I love that. And I love even sacred story. I love even how you guys, the words that you chose for that. There's so many different stories I could share, but there's one I was just thinking about, which is back in 2005 when I was at a retreat, at a spiritual retreat. And this was about 2 years before I started teaching spiritual classes or intuitive development classes. So I was very much exploring, and I wasn't thinking about teaching or anything like that. I had just gone to this retreat for my own personal growth. And it was very deep dive work that we were doing. It was very deep inner work. And at a certain point, all this, I say energy, but when I say energy, I mean like feelings and thoughts and images in my mind, like mental image pictures associated with feelings and thoughts and experiences. All this old stuff, old energy started to bubble up. And really, what was happening in that moment was it was bubbling up to leave my space, but I kind of didn't realize that. I just was experiencing momentarily. When I say momentarily, I mean it was at least a couple of hours of feeling like this, but it was bubbling up so that it could leave. But I was identifying with it as it was bubbling up and starting to feel really, I would say, disturbed or really uncomfortable. And there was a part of me that kind of, I felt a little like I was losing my mind. It was the fear that I was hitting because all this energy was, had been unconscious in me. And basically, it's what I had absorbed in my journeys up to that point, being out in the world and just being such a healer and caretaker. I had been carrying so much energy with me that from taking care of so many people and being such a healer, kind of healer on overdrive, unknowingly. So it was all very unconscious. And so each time I was out there in the world, wanting to make the world a better place and help people, I was helping people, yes, but each time I was absorbing more and more of that energy. And so it was causing me to do, like, you might say, like a dance around that energy to try to manage it. And so now I know as a teacher when I'm teaching that when we hit energy, generally we do three things, or there's four things we can do. Generally, we can either resist it, and what we resist persists, or we try to override it, spiritual overriding or emotional overriding, really the same thing, just overriding, or we become it and we think that it's ours. And there's another way, of course, which is that we can just decide to become more neutral to it and observe it and get curious, or even, just start to, for even a moment, observe it and realize that we have experiences, but we're not our experiences. And so in that moment, I was resisting it and I was becoming it and I was overriding it. And so that's why I said to my teacher at the time, I said, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Am I okay? And he laughed, of course, very compassionately. And he said, oh, you are not losing your mind. You can't lose anything that's really yours. You're just letting go of, you're shedding or letting go of what you've been carrying around all this time. And so when he said that, I felt much better. And I also kind of started to find some laughter within myself. And it wasn't long, a couple of hours. It wasn't long before really I started to give myself that permission for that old stuff that I had been carrying around, the weight of the world, you might call it, for sure, that all of us carry around, those of us who care about the well-being of others. And so in time, I started to just let that old stuff fall away. And so by the end of that day, I started to move into a whole new space with my spiritual growth, and where all of a sudden just more space started to open up for me to show up. You might say for me to show up as the soul I am in this, this body that I have, to be able to create something new, to have a new experience. So I was basically creating more space for more of my light to show up, for more of what I had to offer to others. And so so once I got past that experience of feeling really disturbed and kind of stuck and kind of scared, which is really part of sometimes what happens to us as part of our spiritual growth, I was feeling just really incredible, really free. It was like if you were carrying a 500-pound backpack or something and and you didn't even know, you just thought it was normal and you set it down, you said, "Oh, wow, I feel completely different." And so that was a really phenomenal experience for me that even though I wasn't realizing that I was gonna be teaching, but it certainly helped me as a teacher because then when I started to teach, then of course I was drawing students that had the same thing going on because that's what happens when you teach spiritually as you start to draw people that have had similar experiences. So that process was so valuable to me because it helped me to be compassionate and to see how much we all carry as healers, as sensitive people, as intuitives out in the world, and then help me to be able to set the space and create a safe space for my students to be able to become consciously aware of what they were carrying so they could also release it. And so it helped me to streamline that process within myself and then later on as a teacher. And it taught me a lot about spiritual growth, the process of spiritual growth when we hit a growth period, as I call it, that there's that period of integration where something comes up and we recognize it's we're becoming aware of it. And so we don't need to get stuck on it. We can just keep letting it go. And then our body has to integrate it as well. So that experience was kind of a long story maybe, but it was a really great kickoff for for my spiritual growth and becoming a teacher.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. And I love what you're sharing, and I love that you call it a kickoff because I can just feel the energy starting to move. And something that I want to speak to and ask about is so we were talking just last week about this idea of, pruning, letting go, surrendering, letting go of what was to create space for what is.
Yeah.
We were talking about it very much from the perspective that I feel like most people are very familiar with what that experience is, as far as like, friendships that are changing, relationships that are evolving, maybe a new job that's calling you when one doesn't fit or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But what was really speaking to me as you were sharing is you're talking about energetic clearance. You're talking about, and not to say that that's not all energy, because everything is energy, energy is everything. But, and I might not have the perfect language for it, so I'm going to try to articulate it. But what was really coming through was like, you're talking about shifting energetically. Even when you're telling that story, it's like you weren't necessarily maybe writing down in your journal all the things that didn't fit in your life. That's part of it, but you were really attuned to like energetically what you were carrying and what you were clearing. And something that was coming through too when you were talking is I was like, "Oh, Gwyneth is she's like a powerful like shifter. Like she like creates like shift in energy." So, going off of my intuition there, but just curious what that means for you.
Love that. I love what you said that I'm a powerful shifter because I never thought about that.
Yeah.
So that maybe that's true. I mean, I never thought about that because I feel like everyone can do that. And and I mean, I love to help people to do that. So I feel like we're all capable of doing that in different ways. And so now I'm forgetting your question. Wait, what was what was your question?
Just speaking to, and it's hard to articulate, it's hard to put into words, and that's why I'm really trying to lean into it intuitively myself and just
Yeah.
kind of feel into the energy of it, because you're talking about something that's a little bit like another level, if you will, if I had to put it in language. Because what a lot of people are familiar with is a feeling of when I'm letting go, when things are bubbling up to the surface, they can look at it and say very cognitively and rationally, this is what I'm letting go of.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about, and as you're sharing, I'm like, there's so much energy moving in what you're sharing. And I don't know exactly why, but I'm like, I feel like this is something about you. And so I'm like, teach me, like what
Right.
is, yeah.
Yes. So I love that question. That's a really great question. And it's the difference between our using our thinking brain, where we're thinking about it and we're deciding maybe what it is, versus essentially energetically sitting back and allowing ourselves to just be in our neutral, what I would just call our neutral awareness. I mean, awareness is neutral, just being in our awareness and just observing and seeing what is bubbling up, because sometimes it's very different than what our thinking brain might tell us that it is. And so, really, it's about getting into a space, setting a space within yourself, or being in a space that's set for you where you can be just in your awareness and turn down that thinking brain or that analyzing part that we all have, which is great and very useful. That analyzing and thinking brain. Of course, we have lots of great use for that, as we all know, lots of great uses. But we're not given the tools starting from when we're little to just be able to have that permission. We're not given that permission to just be in our awareness and just observe, and then start to work with it on that energetic level, I would say, that healing energetic level. And then later on, we might put words to it and think about it or write something down in a journal. But it's really letting ourselves allow a process to move from just being a thinking process to a experiential process where we're tapping into our superpowers, or ourselves on a soul level. And so I hope that maybe answers the question, or starts to answer the question.
Sure. Yeah. I don't ask very direct questions. So it's mostly just kind of holding space for like, yeah, I'm wondering what is stirring and what's coming up, and I appreciate what you're sharing.
Yeah, so it's just a process. Like when I teach my students to read energy, they're just trusting themselves to access their abilities on a different level. And they'll just start to read energy. And beforehand, they might think, oh, I don't know if I'll be able to really read energy. What is reading energy? But once they start to do it, they start to realize how simple it is. It actually can be very simple. And then you start to build that trust within yourself. And so, really, in that moment, when I had that moment of where I shifted a whole lot of energy really rapidly, I moved from just kind of thinking about it to tapping into my awareness and just becoming aware of it. And then once you become aware, that's a beautiful space to be. And that, I always feel like that's your 50% there. When you become aware of something, like let's say you want to heal a pattern or transform something in your life. When you reach that point of where you're aware of it, but you're just not sure what to do with it, that's a great space to be in. And then it's really changing the way that you're then relating to it. Because, like I said, we so much want to either resist something, which is kind of pushing it back and keeping it at arm's length, or we become it, or we override it. And so when we get out of doing any of those three things and we're just relating to it in a new way, then things start to change or transform really, really rapidly. So it can happen really rapidly.
Yeah, and I think as soon as you said aware, right? So once you move into that level of awareness, as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm feeling into, is like we many of us, I think, have this sense of like, being present and being aware. But you're talking about exactly what you said. Like, so you get into awareness and then there's another layer. I mean, there's always other layers, but you're talking about, and then you learn to read energy, right? So I'd be curious, that's something that you teach. What might you teach us about that for somebody that might be ready to kind of stretch themselves from awareness to being in that field a little bit differently?
Yeah, and being able to release what's coming up too, actively release, which is really using, I mean, we're tapping into our creativity and our imagination, and we're using those abilities that are very powerful to be able to heal ourselves, to be able to release energy. But when I train people to read energy so that they're able to see what's coming up within themselves and what's coming up in someone else's space as well, is it's an amazing experience of um well, it's a step-by-step process, and actually when I teach students, it always begins with getting grounded first. That's foundational. So, I mean, every day I start my day with becoming grounded, because here we are in this incredibly ungrounded world. Nature is really grounded, but that's it. The rest of the world is ungrounded. So, I always start my day by getting grounded. And then you're tapping into your senses, your incredible senses, and you're in your body, and you can access more awareness. So that's a great starting point. So there's a whole set of steps when I'm teaching people to read energy. We begin by getting grounded and then just being centered in our neutral awareness. But I also teach people how to release feelings and thoughts that come up in a very simple way through a visualization. But when I train people to read energy, it's a really beautiful process, because you get two people reading each other, giving each other a reading, let's say, and I'm actually teaching them how to release what I would call a matching picture that comes up. So we all have lots of matching pictures with each other. And so when we start to notice those, what I would call matching pictures between us, it's a beautiful thing, because you recognize you have a matching picture, you release it, and then you have deeper insight immediately into each other. And so it helps you to grow and heal, and it's simultaneously healing for both people. And it also opens up space to see more deeply. And so we have so many different matching pictures with each other. And so that's part of the process, the growth process. And oftentimes we think, oh, I don't have anything in common with that person. I don't have any matching pictures. But sometimes that's where we have the most matching pictures. And so that's part of the process of training people to read energy, but it's really a step-by-step process before we get to that point. And so I like to teach people how to set their space for themselves. So after they get grounded, also just setting their space with a certain quality or set of qualities of energy changes the way that then they relate to themselves, and then the way they relate to the world around them. And so that's really important, because really being able to just set your energy in a very simple way, which is once again just taught through a guided visualization, that starts to create in and of itself, I would say, more awareness. And also it starts to kind of streamline or focus your intentions more clearly as well. So I don't know if what I'm saying is clear enough, because there's so many different ways to talk about it. And that is one of the reasons why I wrote my book, because it was to find ways to bring this work to people in a really accessible way. How can I put this into words that are really understandable and could just bring it, and could hopefully maybe bring it to anybody and help everyone to realize how intuitive they are, and how much, because the other thing is we're so intuitive so often, and we just don't realize how intuitive we are. And once we start to realize how intuitive we are, then that builds the trust within ourselves. So, like I was just getting my hair cut the other day, and the woman cutting my hair, she doesn't consider that she's even kind of interested in this kind of work, but she basically started to give me a reading. And so that was so great. And I said to her, "You're really intuitive." She just didn't think of it that way. So that's the other great thing is when people start to realize, "Oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm being intuitive." Because we don't, it's just not something that our culture has given really any no space at the table, basically. Um,
Right.
it's never been given any space at the table. It's never been given a language. And so that's why it's hard when we, as adults, a lot of times we want to come back to this work. We started out incredibly intuitive. We started out incredibly aware of being aware. And we started out incredibly creative. And then we sort of lose track of it along the way. And we come to a point as adults where we get all this other training, all incredible training, whatever it might be for someone. They go and they get their PhD or whatever it is, they become a nurse or a school teacher, and then they want to come back to this work because it's who they are. It's actually intimately connected to who they are and their purpose and how they can share in the world in both the ways that they are already recognizing how they've already been sharing and also share in a new way, something that they want to bring into their lives through becoming more aware of being intuitive.
Do you tend to work with and teach people who are really like kind of in a space where they don't feel very connected to their intuition and they want to learn how to step into it? Maybe just in that way of listening to themselves more? Or do you work more with people who feel deeply intuitive in a way and they're looking for, because I feel intuitive can be used in these different ways, kind of the spectrum of it, where maybe following your inner compass more to we also use that phrase to mean essentially like deeply psychic ways of moving through the world. So, do you tend to teach people who are already really in that space and wanting to develop as an intuitive, or people who are more kind of very far from feeling connected to that space and want to touch it again, or both?
I would say over the years, I've ended up teaching a lot of people they're super interested in spiritual growth and they may have had other kinds of classes before and they've had lots of intellectual training as well. Like they might be a mental health therapist or a nurse or a doctor or a school teacher, artist, writer, whatever. And they know that they're very intuitive and they want to grow that ability within themselves and they want to heal. They recognize that all the training that they've had, there's something missing that they want to expand on, that they want to grow in a new and different way than the ways that they have so far as an adult been growing. They know that there's more out there than what just meets the eye and than what they've been given so far.
And they're
So
ready to let it take up more space in their life, maybe, and you help teach them how to do that.
yeah, exactly. Just to develop that ability that already is within them. It's just like an underused muscle.
Yeah. Mhm. I love
A
hearing.
spiritual muscle.
Yeah.
I would say too, speaking as a therapist and training other therapists, I would say too that something that happens too for those people is it is a used muscle. Like they are using it, whether like
Yes.
nurse, doctor, therapist, writer, right? Like it is a used muscle. But I think that they start to become maybe more curious and want to hone that skill and that ability because obviously there's so much more you can do when you're attuned, and tapped into your intuitive knowing. There's so much more you can help someone else out with that. But it also, like, to be honest, it also brings so much life. And I even use the word fun sometimes to the work because it changes things, to have that background, that clinical knowing, that understanding, framework, but then be able to really swim in those places intuitively with people. So, yeah, I've seen a lot of that.
I love that. I love exactly what you're saying because, yes, I mean, all those people that you were mentioning, they know they're intuitive. They know they're tapped into that and they want to bring more of it into their personal and professional life, and it does bring greater playfulness. It does bring joy. It really is a joy to access that part of yourself. It's like coming home to be able to play with the divine or tap into the divine and to recognize that you're more than just a body walking around in the world. We tend to just look at each other as bodies and address each other on that level. And I'm not and when I say we, I just mean that culturally we're not taught to say hello to the divine in ourselves, to what's divine in others. And when we start to do that, it's a beautiful experience of joy. Just it's like a little bit of sunshine in your life that you can bring in anytime, and that can really start to guide your life with more clarity and and um and with more fun, I would say, more playfulness, more laughter. Even though I started out talking about doing the work, doing the inner work can sometimes be kind of rough, but at the same time, incredibly rewarding. Anytime we take any kind of journey, there can be some pain on that journey, but then we get to where we're going and we're really, really happy that we did that. And so when we find ways to approach the journey or relate to the journey, that comes back to how do we set our space for spiritual growth in a conscious way? And when we do that, it makes the journey much more fun because it's not easy being human. We're always going to have some some pain and some challenges, but yeah, I think that the people that you're referring to recognize, wow, this enhances the quality of my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There's such a sense of fullness, like feeling kind of the invisible shape of the invisible world. And also when you let it kind of just nestle into yourself in that like allowing and that integration and like let it do its thing within you. You know, it feels like that shape is very magical feeling.
I agree 100%. I know exactly what you're saying. And even talking to you two, that's what it feels like. It's a beautiful feeling of connection because it allows you to connect with people on a deeper level, connect with animals on a deeper level, nature, your children. You're connecting on a deeper level and with yourself too. So it's a beautiful space to be in, and sometimes throughout our day, we move in and out, of course, different spaces. We end up, one moment we might be feeling grumpy or frustrated about something, or we hit a big challenge that we're navigating, but then we can move more and more easily into accessing that beautiful space that you're talking about, Robin. And so you end up being in that space more and more, even during those difficult, challenging times that we all encounter. And then it also just opens up more space to have more conscious conversations, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm curious, what brought you into your deep connection to your own intuition and creativity?
I definitely, as a child, I was really intuitive and really tuned in. I mean, and I would say, of course, all children are. So as a child, I just remember being very intuitive. And luckily for me, I remember my mom even reminded me of some of those kinds of experiences. But it may be because when I was 4, I had one of those near death type experiences. And maybe that's what the setup was for me to be more aware of the unseen world. But I do remember certainly there was a time in my life where I went more away from the spiritual or intuitive. Like certainly when I was a teenager or in the first part of my 20s, but it wasn't long before I kind of circled back to it again. But when I was 4, I had this experience where I was stung by a bee and I went into anaphylactic shock. And so my mom and my sister rushed me to the hospital and I was turning blue and it was very close situation, and so my breathing was shutting down and all that, and they got me to the hospital, and I had that experience where my body was on the table and I was out, and I was just looking at my body, and I remember very clearly having that experience of realizing that I was more than just a body. I wasn't just a 4-year-old, because prior to that, I actually had had the thought, "Is this all there is to life?" So I was 4, but I felt like a teenager, and I couldn't understand why adults were relating to me like I was a 4-year-old. It sounds really comical. And so I felt unseen at that point, even though I had a perfectly great family, so it's but at the same time, I felt unseen because I was seeing people through my awareness. I could see that they were way more than just a body. I could see what was going on with them, what, let's say, what kind of suffering they were walking around with or what they were carrying or who they really were there's the veneer and then who they really were underneath that. A really sensitive soul, let's say, a really loving person that was walking around acting tough or whatever it might be, all the different coping mechanisms, right? That we all learn as adults to survive in the world, especially if we don't get that validation at a young age that we're more than the body. So, anyway, so I had this experience of realizing and looking at my body and realizing, wow, I bring life to my body and I'm okay. My body's not okay, but I'm actually okay. And then when I came back to my body, after I got the shot of adrenaline that brought me back, I came back and I felt really kind of, even though I was shocked that the experience happened and all that, at the same time, I was also really happy because it answered a question that I'd been walking around with as a 4-year-old going, wait a second, is this all there is to life? How come nobody sees me? I see them, and so it confirmed something that I couldn't forget very easily. So it made it harder maybe to slip into becoming unconscious because I kept remembering, wow, okay, there's this part of me that is really powerful and really bright and has so much wisdom, that's way beyond just this 4-year-old body. So, yeah, so I would say that that was maybe the setup, and I think also that's a joyful realization to have, so maybe that helped me to carry the joy of that. I mean, even though it actually this would be another story, it left me with some, B PTSD. So where I was terrified of bees. And so that's a whole 'nother thing that I could talk about because I went through that experience of, if I was at a picnic and there was a bee, just a little, bee buzzing around that was perfectly harmless, my body just would go into panic. I would just have to bolt out of there. It took me quite a long time before I could feel comfortable around bees, right? So that's the body's reaction holding the trauma of what happened. But then there's this other part of me, the soul part of me, that really needed to have that experience to remember who I was and celebrate that and maybe be able to help other people remember who they are as well. So,
I love that. What a beautiful story. Thank you.
yeah.
There is so much in what you're sharing that I want to just tap on to a few things. I'm really appreciating listening to you, and I can feel the teacher in you. And I want to just speak to a couple little points of what you said there, because you said, you had that moment of like, is this all there is to life? And you remember that very young. And what stood out to me there is I guess what I want to share, even just to listeners, is sometimes when we are just starting to attune to that inner voice, I feel like that's where it really starts out. Like it starts out often in this way of like, kind of like maybe this question that you carry or hear
Yes.
versus, over time when it develops differently, it's more guiding, leading, knowing. But I really feel like, I mean, I can say certainly for myself, and I've seen it in clients too, like a very beginning stage of, oh, my intuition is speaking to me, feels like it holds these kind of like, well, what is this? Or like, what would it be like if this was different? Or and we kind of hear those threads like in the beginning of opening up. So I wanted to speak to that. And then the other thing you said that I feel like is so important is you said, I had a wonderful family. I had this, supportive experience. And I know you wrote about this experience in your book, this near death experience. And even though I had this wonderful family, I felt unseen. And I appreciate that because the more that I've done spiritual work and understanding, the more I'm able to hold something, even in your experience of feeling unseen. You were so aware that you were still part of a family that was very loving, very caring. And why I feel like that's so important is because the narrative is so strong in the world today that, the reason that we feel unseen and we have these experiences is because our family isn't showing up for us. Like the narrative of our parents messed us all up, right? and and there is truth to that, and none of us who are parents, we understand that none of us are perfect. And there is truth to that of course there are many, many people out there who have deep wounding because of things that have happened in their family line. But I also wanted to speak to that because I feel like, and as I was saying, is I feel like the more I've grown spiritually, I've learned this too, is that those of us who came into the world really attuned, tapped in, or just with like a different kind of life course, let's say, are people who really needed to be attuned to, are people who really needed to be seen. And it may not have been intentional or even a failing that wasn't necessarily mirrored to us. So I wrote it down because I was like, that feels really important to speak to, and the way that I kind of put it into language myself is I say, like, yeah, there were many ways in which my own mother wasn't able to hold me, but that's been part of my life journey in ways as not many people have been able to, because we do often come in, those of us who are attuned, like with this deeper need that is maybe a little bit harder to meet, or maybe is meant to be met by the divine, right? So I wanted to speak to that because it really stood out to me as something that's like, yeah, I feel like that's so important for people to know and feel into themselves too. And so I appreciated that you shared that.
And I love what you just said.
I'll say to Gwyneth, I wrote down and I circled and put stars by, I was like, energy and body. Like there just seems to be, and it was what I was picking up on before when you were speaking. I was like, there's something that I feel like you teach or know or convey really well about the difference of like doing the work in the astral world and getting it into the body.
Yes.
So I might actually go off of that and share something. I wanted to share something from your book. It's really in the beginning, and you shared spiritual growth happens when you allow an internal update to your data templates. This is commonly known as healing. When you allow an update, you optimize your life and restore harmony and collaboration within your intuitive biome. And something that I thought that was really interesting about that is Robin and I have had a conversation before where I was using the word coding, and I was like, I don't know why I'm saying it like that, but it almost feels like a way to try to explain, not that we are computer systems, but we are energetic systems, how it is that we upgrade. And I feel that you are explaining that here too, right? When you're like, we are shifting internal templates, we are shifting our data. And I might not want to continue that language too much because I'm not going to be too good at using it. But just coming to this idea, I feel like, and I'll let you speak to it, but I just feel like as I was reading what you were sharing, I feel like you were really teaching people how to merge energy and body, how to allow, even going back to what we were talking about before, it's different than just being in awareness and understanding that, like, oh, this job doesn't fit me anymore. You're really speaking to like feeling into sensing, reading, and allowing energy to move, change, shift, and then the deep embodiment of that journey.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. That's a beautiful way to express it. And that is true. That is exactly what I'm aiming to help people do and what I love helping people to do. And what I think so important is for us to be able to bring this incredible knowledge that we have, let's say, as a soul, and bring it into the body and be able to express it in the world in a grounded way to make the world a better place, each in our own way, with our gifts, using the gifts and skills that we have. But yes, embodying it is just, that's really where the fun starts. If you ask me, being able to just bring it in and make the space for it within yourself so that you can express it through this incredible vessel, your body, which is a gift too. And the more that we clear out what we absorbed, what's not ours, the more we make space to be able to express our presence, our light, who we are as, let's say, an infinite being through this incredible body that we have. So,
Yes, yes. What really comes to me through that is I'm going to bring in nervous system now,
yeah,
because when you are talking about we need to clear it out, like, yes, we need to clear out the parts of our lives that are no longer aligning, but sometimes we need to clear out ancestral trauma.
yeah.
Sometimes we need to clear out energetic imprints. Sometimes we need to, and so I feel like my own fascination with the nervous system has really been in this way of understanding it as not only biological, but like sacred field, sacred vessel, this energetic space that is so filled with so many nuances of not only our experiences, but everything that we're carrying from others, even our trauma histories and our imprints and our patterns with others and the ancestors that came before us. And so that also is a really difficult thing to articulate, but I feel like it's just important to share too, because, and I think that's what I was trying to give words to before as well. It's like, it's not necessarily just what it is that we see on this one level, right? Like when we're doing our work, when we're really advancing energetically and spiritually, we start to really see what it is also that we're carrying in our field. And I imagine that you have wisdom in that when you're teaching people how to read energy and how to work with it.
Yes, I mean, and that's where also becoming grounded and setting our space in a really conscious way helps to create the safety that our body actually needs. Speaking of our nervous system and, trauma and things like that, being able to be present in our bodies and grounded really helps to create that space that we need to feel safe and to have ownership over our body and to be able to communicate with our body. Because when we're ungrounded, and by the way, we unground the moment that we become fearful, or the moment that we feel ashamed, or the moment that even, or maybe when we feel angry, or even sometimes when we're super excited. So it's really easy to become ungrounded, but the more we become aware of when we become ungrounded, then the easier it is to then reground ourselves. And each time we do that, our nervous system immediately calms down. And so we can get into greater communication with our physical body. I certainly find that the moment that I get really wound up about something, if I just ground, literally, I can feel my whole nervous system just going, okay, we're safe. Now we can get back to work. The doing the work, whatever it is, the spiritual work or whatever kinds of difficult conversations we need to have in our lives or whatever kind of meeting we're headed into, all that kind of thing. Yes. And so, really, that's why it's so important to be able to create a sacred space for ourselves to be in the world. And that really helps with all the kind of nervous system, body level, and the fears that come up and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I feel like it also speaks to what I often say, my belief, I don't push it on anybody, but certainly it's a shared belief of many, which is, trauma is a catalyst for transformation. And what does that actually mean in the healing journey? And really it is, it's like we do have to do that healing work. I'm going to use that word. And in order to be able to be safe in our bodies, in order to be able to attune to our bodies, to be able to show up fully and use this as our sacred vessel, right? Like our knowing, our ability to, sense, read, experience energy, embody things, shift, heal, grow. So, yeah, I think that that's what comes up for me while you're sharing. I have a little bit of a fun question to ask you, and then I'll invite you to share anything else that you might want to share about your work with us. And then certainly, Robin, if you have anything. But one of my questions, I saw, your Instagram lives and you were asking people to share something about an intuitive story, like a moment when you knew that you were being guided. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to ask Gwyneth if there's something that comes to her that she might want to share, because that is part of the like fun, exciting part of using your intuition and being attuned.
A moment that I knew I was being guided. Yes, I remember, gosh, so many moments. And I think that's so important because, especially the little things, when you start to recognize, oh, my intuition. I mean, I'll tell you about a story in a moment, but I love that what you're saying because just recognizing the little things is so important. Oh, my intuition guided me to pick a parking spot over on the west side of the parking area and I followed it and there was a parking spot and it was a really busy day. Or, oh, I didn't listen to it and I went to the south end of the parking lot and I didn't find a parking spot. Either way is a great learning experience. So I think recognizing the little things is so key and it builds your trust, that inner trust. So then when the big questions come along, you're ready when it's time to decide, whoa, what am I going to change in my career? Or, where am I going to move because I'm ready to move? Or, who do I want to marry? Or whatever it might be, right? Really big questions. But I remember there was a certain point in my life where I had lived in many different places in the world, and I was at a crossroads where basically I was going to either settle in England or, and I had a relationship in England. And so the person I was in this relationship with, he wanted me to settle in England. But intuitively, I was being really pulled back to Vermont. And I remember just really struggling because it was a really important decision. It was in some ways, wow, am I going to build a life in a whole different country, being England, and with this person who was ultimately not the right match for me, but certainly somebody in the moment that I knew I was in love with and that kind of thing. And so it was, do I settle in Vermont or do I settle in England? And there was no specific reason to settle in Vermont. There was no specific, like, oh, here's a whole setup for you if you come back to Vermont. And I followed my intuition, which was to come back and settle in Vermont, which later on I realized all the reasons why that was the right way for me to go. There were so many reasons for that. But in that moment, and I really struggled over the decision. So it was like a year of trying to make that decision. But so that's an example of where I realize later on. So sometimes with our intuition, it takes us a while. We make a decision, we have to trust it, and we realize in hindsight. And then there's those other times when you get immediate gratification. 5 minutes later, you realize, oh yeah, I'm glad I followed my intuition. So
I
yeah,
actually love that story, and I love to play with intuition, which I'm sure you ladies have done this, and
true.
I have to share because when you share, I'm like, my heart is like, oh yes, like I feel like intuitively, like you're validating me in some ways right now. So thank you. Because one of the stories that I would share briefly too is about a move. And I recently relocated back in the Sierras where I'm from. And it's same thing. But there was just a part of me, even though a lot of things just didn't make sense, like my businesses are back in California, but I was like, I have to go. And I have this symbol, which I will share. And it's kind of a fun thing, too. So if anybody listening is interested in trying this, I set up a symbol with my guides once. I was learning from somebody like yourself who teaches therapists and people like that to develop their intuition. And she did this really fun thing with us where she was like, hey, I want you, in this sacred space to set up this symbol with your guides. And, you'll use this symbol, you'll see this symbol, your guides will show you the symbol whenever you're being guided, right? So it's a silly symbol. And I was like, really? That's going to be the symbol? Okay, that's what came through. So it's a pineapple. So, anyways, I'm looking at houses, and mind you, don't need to be looking at houses or buying a house. Like, what am I doing? Right. And so I was like, okay, guides, I was like, if I'm hearing you right, show me a pineapple somewhere today. It doesn't have to be exactly here, but and we arrive, and the realtor goes to open the door, and there's a golden pineapple just right on the door. It's like an old knocker. And I just was so grateful, and I was giggling so hard. So I appreciate this story that you're sharing, and that's why I'm like, I have to tell you this story because I'm still in process. I've been here for about 2 years now again, and I'm still in process of experiencing why did I come home? Like, what does that all have to unfold? So I was like, oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I
Yeah,
love that
that's a
connection.
great story. I love it, and that's it. You set yourself up for it to be fun, I think, when with your intuition, when we approach it in that way, like your pineapple story, that's great. Yeah, it's so fun. If you're like, if I'm cross country skiing in the woods or something like that, I go, oh, should I go right or should I go left? And just play with it like that in such a low stakes way, and then you build a friendship with it because really it's a way to connect. It's like a bridge. Our intuition is a bridge for us from our higher self into this world that we live in, this physical world that we live in. It's a way to receive and bring in and open up to so much out there that's supporting us and guiding us. So it's a way to really open into a whole new space that's totally supporting us. That's what's really fun about it, I think.
I have a question for you,
Yes.
Gwyneth. I feel like in this point in my life, I kind of let my intuition and connection to the unseen world really set the course. So, as a mom, and you're a mom too, and you're a teacher of intuition. So, I was wondering, do you have any ways that you have worked with your child or your kids to just help them build trust in that unseen world, that connection there?
Yeah. Well, I used to teach intuitive tools to kids, actually. Kids get this stuff really fast, but as far as validating their intuition, like with my daughter when she was young, she would tell me all kinds of things that were really powerful and amazing. She was just tapping into her guidance, her intuition, her abilities. So when she would tell me things, I would go, wow, you're so intuitive. Or just, wow, that is so true. I would just really listen and just validate the truth of what she was saying. Sometimes kids what they say can just get brushed over sometimes. And so I think just listening and really hearing what they're saying and validating that. But Yeah. And then there's just the intuitive tools, like the tools that I used to teach for kids, and just saying hello to them, spirit to spirit, just recognizing within yourself your own light, and then really being able to just say hello on a nonverbal level to them. I used to teach, I forgot about this, but I taught intuitive tools for parents for a while to help parents to be able to say hello more clearly and easily, more experientially, just be able to practice saying hello, which is really just validating your child beyond the body. So it's just that, like, the experience that I had when I had my near death experience of recognizing, oh, I'm not just a body. We can do that anytime for our kids, anytime, anywhere. And once we know that, and we're just consciously aware that we want to say hello to them on that deeper level, and we start to sort of just practice it in our minds in whatever way is sort of natural for us, they get that hello. They get that nonverbal hello from us. They know when we're seeing them on that level. Because once we know within ourselves, then we can give it to them. It's just that, as parents, we can only give as much as we ourselves have learned. And so that's why the more that we learn and grow, the more we just naturally share. And our kids are tuned in. They're just watching us, whether we like it or not. They're watching us every moment, right? To see how we are in the world. And then they're matching that. Kids are amazing at matching energy. They will match our different states, or we can also choose to match them too, like if they're laughing and having a silly time and we're in more of our adult space, it's fun to actually match them in their space too. But just noticing. Also, I think as parents, when we're grounded, if we start to notice when we're grounded, and then they'll also match that on some level in their own way. Or if they're not, then kids have their own journey too. Very
Yeah.
much so.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's all part of our growth. I mean, being a parent is such amazing spiritual growth because we're just constantly, from the moment that our child is born, our children, we just are immediately thrown into such growth all the time. And every kid is just so different, aren't they? Like what they come in as, what they come in, they're just teaching us from day one.
I think that one of the biggest gifts I just feel like in my own that I'm called to do, I feel like it's to help people listen and connect to that piece of themselves that listens and then trusts so you can move with it. And so I think your work being so directly tied to helping people learn to do this in themselves when it really feels pretty alien to a lot of people just in our conventional society, so gorgeous. So thank you for sharing about it.
Yeah.
Gwyneth, I wanted to ask before we wrap up, just if there's anything else that you might want to share about your recent book or anything else that you want to add to our space today.
Well, there's so much I could share, but yeah, I mean, I would just say the book has 20 different activities in it, or exercises and practices. And the idea is to give you a really strong and clear foundation for being intuitive and bringing that in a really integrated way into your personal and professional life, and into whatever space you want to bring it into, so that you can really embody it and enjoy it and have fun with it.
Yeah, and I feel like you are living proof. Just this conversation has been really beautiful and I appreciate it so much. And just really feeling into energy and body, energy and integration with you has felt really lovely today. So I'm grateful.
Likewise. Yes, it's been so beautiful talking to both of you. I've had so much fun. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us, Gwyneth. It was lovely to meet you.
Great to
Thank you.
meet you too.
And that is all for today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for being with us today. If you feel called, follow the podcast wherever you listen and connect with us on Instagram or YouTube at sacred.conversations.podcast. And most of all, may you keep opening to yourself, to the mystery, and to the story within you that's still being written.